Going to more places will not solve your version of this problem. Not because effort doesn't matter, because the assumption underneath the advice is wrong. Proximity was never what made friendships real. It was just what started them. And for a generation whose actual self lives somewhere, the neighborhood bar or the Saturday morning run club never quite reaches. Starting in the wrong place keeps producing the same result. You show up, you make conversation, you exchange numbers, and 3 weeks later, you're back where you started. That's not a failure of execution. That's a structural mismatch between the search method and the thing you're actually searching for. This video is about that mismatch and what changes when you finally search in the right dimension. Here's something that gets skipped in almost every conversation about adult loneliness. For most of human history, proximity and identity were correlated. If you lived in a small town, worked in a local trade, attended the same church as your neighbors, the people nearest you were, more often than not, people who shared your world. Not your exact values. Not your specific way of seeing things, but enough overlap that closeness could grow out of repeated contact. Proximity worked as a social technology because the environments it operated in did something proximity can't do on its own. They filtered by context. The office didn't just put you near people, it put you near people who had chosen the same field, the same city, often the same general life stage. The neighborhood bar didn't just give you bodies in a room. It gave you people with enough shared circumstances that conversation had somewhere to go. That filter is gone now. Remote work didn't just move your laptop. It removed the last ambient environment that automatically generated context-filtered proximity for most adults. And what's replaced it? The app, the event, the Facebook group for people who live within 5 miles of you doesn't have the filter built in. It has proximity without context. And proximity without context produces a specific familiar result. You end up in a room with people who happen to be nearby. Some of them are interesting, some of them aren't. Most of the connections that form are pleasant and go nowhere. Research on friendship formation is clear on this, and it's worth saying directly. Proximity was the primary factor in friendship initiation. The more we are exposed to someone, the more familiar and comfortable they become. But familiarity is not the same as match. Familiarity is what proximity produces. Match is something else. And for adults, specifically for adults with specific identities, specific ways of seeing the world, specific things they actually care about, familiarity without match produces acquaintances, not friends. The problem was never that you didn't go to enough places. The problem is that you were using a tool designed for a different era, in an environment that no longer has the filter that made the tool work. Let's talk about what actually does predict real connection. There's a distinction that almost no one makes clearly enough to be useful. The distinction between surface-level similarity and deep-level match. Surface-level similarity is, you both like hiking. You both work in tech. You both moved to this city from somewhere else. You both have a dog. These things give conversation somewhere to start. They do not predict whether a friendship will become real. Deep-level match is different. Research on what actually predicts friendship formation identifies consistent predictors: shared taste in music, ethical views, and a belief that you share valuable character traits with another person. Not shared zip code, not shared hobby category, shared worldview, shared aesthetic, shared sense of what matters and what doesn't. You already know what this feels like, even if you haven't had it recently. It's the conversation where you stop monitoring how you're coming across, because the other person is saying something that sounds like the inside of your own head. It's the moment where you realize you've been talking for 2 hours, and it felt like 20 minutes. It's the specific absence of performance. The version of you that shows up when you're not managing an impression. That's not chemistry, that's resonance. And resonance is not random, it follows a pattern. It has a source. The people who produce that response in you are not randomly distributed across every neighborhood, every gym, every generic interest group. They tend to cluster, not always geographically. That's the part the old advice missed. They cluster by worldview, by the specific things they read, make, care about, argue about at midnight, by the values they've actually chosen, not the demographic categories they happen to land in. Surface similarity gives you something to talk about. Deep-level match gives you someone to talk to. And if you spent years attending surface similarity events and finding the connections evaporate in 3 weeks, that's not a persistence problem. That's a level problem. You are searching at the wrong depth. Now, here's the part that most people haven't considered. And it's the part that makes this specific problem harder for this specific generation than for anyone who came before. The algorithm has been making it harder to find your people. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but structurally. Here's what the algorithm actually does. It watches what you engage with and serves you more of it. More content like the content you clicked. More perspectives like the perspectives you lingered on. More aesthetic, more tone, more voice, calibrated to your engagement history. This sounds like personalization, and in some ways it is. But there's a critical error in how it's been affecting your ability to find real people. Your engagement behavior is not the same thing as your identity. You engage with things that are surprising, or outrageous, or funny, or that confirm something you were already anxious about. You linger on things that hook your attention, which is not always the same as things that reflect your actual values. Over years of this, something specific happens. The algorithm has been building a portrait of you, and that portrait is increasingly accurate as a map of your attention and increasingly inaccurate as a map of your soul. And here's where it connects to the search for real people. Most of the communities that get recommended to you, the groups, the events, the spaces, are also being served by the same algorithm. They're being surfaced based on engagement proximity, not identity proximity. Which means you might spend years cycling through communities that feel adjacent to who you are, but never quite right. Not wrong enough to be clearly wrong, just slightly off, in a way that's hard to name. And the specific exhaustion of that, of being in the right neighborhood but the wrong house over and over, is something this channel takes seriously. Because the problem isn't that your people don't exist. The problem is that the map you've been given was drawn by an algorithm that has been watching what you click, not who you are. Your feed has been telling you what you engage with. It hasn't been telling you who you are. Those are not the same thing. And when you try to find your people using a map that confuses the two, you find people who match your attention pattern, not people who match your actual self. That specific kind of almost but not quite is not a coincidence. It's the structural output of a search conducted in the wrong dimension. If any of this is landing, if what you've been missing is not more events to attend but a clearer framework for what you're actually looking for and where that thing actually lives, there's a resource in the description built exactly for that next step. It's called the Niche Community Blueprint, and it's a workbook that takes you through the specific process of identifying your actual identity markers, not your demographic categories, not your engagement history, and mapping them to the environments where people who share them tend to concentrate, not a list of apps. A real framework, built for someone who has already tried the generic version. Link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So here's what actually changes things. Not a 12-step system. 3 moves. In sequence. And they only work in this order. The first move is the one almost no one does. Identify your actual identity markers. Not your hobbies, your actual markers. There's a difference. A hobby is something you do. An identity marker is something that shapes how you see the world. Reading is a hobby. Being the kind of person who thinks fiction is a more accurate description of reality than most nonfiction. That's an identity marker. Running is a hobby. Running because silence and forward motion are the only things that reliably reset your nervous system. That's an identity marker. Identity markers are the things you would recognize in a stranger before they finish their second sentence. The specific way someone holds an opinion. The things they find funny. The questions they ask about a movie instead of the plot points they summarize. You already know yours. You've been filtering for them your whole life, mostly unconsciously. The first move is making that filter conscious. Write it down. Not, I like X. What does liking X say about how you see the world? The second move, locate the environments where your specific identity markers tend to concentrate. Not the environments that are nearby. Not the environments the algorithm recommends, but the environments that are architected around the specific things that matter to you. This is the level at which the search changes. Not, what's happening near me this weekend. Where do people who see the world the way I see it tend to gather physically or otherwise? And how do I get into those rooms? Sometimes those rooms are local. Sometimes they require a small commute. Sometimes they're online, with occasional in-person moments that have more density than a year of local events. The geography is secondary. The identity architecture of the environment is primary. The third move, and this is the one that requires the most from you, shift from passive attendance to active signal sending. Here's the thing about resonance. It's bilateral. The people who would recognize you they're also in those rooms looking for the same thing. And they have the same social atrophy, the same hesitation, the same protective performance layer. Passive attendance puts two cautious people in the same room and waits for something to happen. Active signal sending is different. It's saying the thing you actually think instead of the safe version. It's asking the question you're actually curious about instead of the question that sounds socially correct. It's being in small, low-risk ways visibly yourself, so that the people who recognize that self have something to recognize. The internal objection here is real and worth naming directly. I've been to interest groups. I've been to niche events. It still felt hollow. The answer to that is almost always one of two things. Either the environment had the right surface, shared activity, but not the right depth, shared worldview. Or the depth was there, but the signal sending wasn't. You were in the right room. You just weren't letting yourself be visible in it. If the framework here opens something you want to go further with, the identity mapping, the environment architecture, the niche community blueprint in the description, and the pinned comment is the detailed next step. It was built specifically for someone who's done the generic version and needs something that accounts for who they actually are. When you think about the people in your life who felt like a real match, not just nearby but actually yours, what was the first thing you recognized in them? Here's what's worth carrying out of this video. The reason the proximity approach kept producing shallow results isn't that you chose the wrong events, or that you didn't try hard enough, or that there's something in you that resists connection. It's that you were using a search method designed for a world where the people near you were, by default, likely to share enough of your context to make connection possible. That world is mostly gone, and the advice never updated. What actually works now is more intentional and, in some ways, more honest. It requires you to know something about yourself that proximity-based socializing never asked you to know: who you actually are, beneath the demographic categories, beneath the engagement history, beneath the performance layer that digital life has spent years building over the top of you. That's not a small ask, but it's also not as mysterious as it feels. You already know who you are. You felt it in rooms where you suddenly didn't have to try. You felt it in conversations where the other person said something and something in you went, yes, exactly that. The search isn't for someone nearby. The search is for someone who sees the world the way you see it. And that person is not evenly distributed across every neighborhood and every meetup and every generic interest group within 5 miles of you. They're somewhere more specific than that. And now you have a different way to look. The path out is real. It's just not the one you were handed.